I had been on Kethvaran for 11 days when I first saw the offering stone. The fortress sat above the cloud line on a ridge of black volcanic rock, the kind of place where wind never stopped and the air tasted like iron. I was there on trade business. Hull-grade composite alloys. Nothing glamorous, negotiating bulk pricing with House Keth Oran's procurement office. 11 days of spreadsheets, formal lunches in cold dining halls with too high ceilings, and evenings spent watching unfamiliar constellations burn through atmosphere so thin the stars didn't twinkle, they just stared. I had been a trade envoy for 16 years by then. 9 postings, 4 languages fluent, 2 more passable. You learn to read a room when you're the only human in it, the way a conversation shifts when you enter, the way certain officials look past your shoulder when they address you, the way some species treat you like furniture and others like a curiosity, and a few, the ones worth doing business with, treat you like a person. Ketharan fell somewhere in the middle. They were formal, efficient, correct. They fed me adequately. They answered my questions about alloy compositions and delivery schedules. They did not ask about my life, and I did not ask about theirs. It was a clean, productive arrangement, and I expected to leave at the end of the month with a signed contract and nothing else worth remembering. On the 12th morning, my liaison, a narrow-shouldered Kevran clerk named Firil, told me the procurement session would be delayed. There was a ceremony in the courtyard, a claiming. I didn't know what that meant. Firil explained it with the careful neutrality of someone who had explained it many times and no longer cared about the answer. A daughter of the house is offered, he said. Suitors attend. If one speaks the word, the contract is sealed. If none speak, she returns inside. And then what? Firil adjusted a data pad against his chest. Then she is offered again, at the next gathering, and the one after. I asked how many times a daughter could be offered. Firil glanced at me. The first time I had seen anything close to discomfort on his green face, and said, "There is no limit." I should have left it there. I had contracts to review, tensile data to verify, a schedule to keep. I was not a diplomat, not a social reformer, not anyone whose opinion on Kethoran domestic customs carried the weight of a grain of dust on that black volcanic ridge. But Firil had said there was no limit, and something in the way he said it, the slight drop at the end of the sentence, as though the words themselves were tired, made me set down my data pad and follow him to the courtyard. The courtyard was open to the sky, black stone underfoot, worn smooth by centuries of wind and ceremony. A low wall ran the perimeter, chest high, and beyond it the mountain dropped away into cloud. The offering stone stood at the center, a flat-topped column of the same volcanic rock, polished until it caught the weak sunlight like dark water. Around the court, tiered stone benches held perhaps 80 observers, delegates from other houses, trade partners, a handful of military officers in formal cloaks. I sat near the back with my data case on my knees, out of place and aware of it. They brought her out through a door I hadn't noticed, cut into the fortress wall and framed with tarnished silver. 2 attendants walked ahead, 1 walked behind. None touched her. Her name, I learned later, was Valana Kethoran, third-born daughter of the senior line, 29 cycles old by their calendar, roughly 34 standard years, tall, taller than me by a hand's width, which put her above most of the Kethoran men in the courtyard too. Her skin was deep teal green, the color of old copper patina, and her hair fell past her shoulders in a thick, dark curtain, indigo black, almost blue where the light caught it. Her eyes, when I finally saw them clearly, were warm copper, the color of a fuel cell contact held up to a lamp. She wore a ceremonial robe, White once, I think, or meant to be. But the fabric was covered in marks. I didn't understand them at first. Small vertical lines, stitched in dark thread along the hem, the sleeves, the high collar, dozens of them. I counted what I could see from the back bench. 40, 45, maybe more along the parts of the fabric that folded against her body. "What are those?" I asked Cyril. He didn't look at me. Refusal tallies, one for each claiming where no suitor spoke. I sat with that for a moment. 45 times, maybe more. She had stood at that stone, or one like it, 45 times, and waited for someone to say a word that no one said. And each time, someone had stitched another line into her robe so that the next gathering would know exactly how many times she had been passed over. She walked to the offering stone and placed both hands flat on it. Her back was straight, her chin was level. Her eyes were open and fixed on a point somewhere, past the low wall, past the cloud, past anything in the courtyard. She did not scan the benches for a sympathetic face. She did not adjust her robe or her hair or her posture. She simply stood and waited, the way someone waits for weather. The house elder Sovrath Kethoran, a broad man with silver-streaked hair pulled tight against his skull, and the formal chain of house authority across his chest, stepped to the stone's left side and spoke the ritual words. I didn't catch all of them. Cyril translated in a low murmur the daughter's full lineage name, her health classification, her genetic viability index, her cycle status. All of it spoken aloud in a courtyard full of strangers, while she stood with her hands on the stone and her face pointed at the sky. Then the floor opened. Any suitor present could approach the stone. They had 10 minutes by the courtyard's sand timer. A glass column mounted on a bronze stand near the elder. To inspect the bride, ask questions of the elder, and speak the claiming word or withdraw. 3 men stood. The first was a Velsoran officer, young, decorated, moving with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. He walked a slow circle around Velana. He looked at her hands, her jaw, the tallies on her robe. He asked the elder something I didn't hear. The elder answered. The officer's mouth thinned. He withdrew without speaking. The second was older, heavy-set, from a trade house whose name I didn't recognize. He approached the stone, studied Velana from about 2 paces away, and turned to the elder. The third daughter, he said. Cyril translated. Not the second is contracted, the elder said. The heavy man looked at Velana one more time. Something in his face, not cruelty, not quite, but something clinical. The way you look at inventory that doesn't move. He shook his head and returned to his bench. The third suitor was young, barely old enough, I thought. He walked to the stone and stood in front of Velana. For a moment I thought he might speak. His hand rose halfway, hesitated, and dropped. He looked at the tallies on her robe, counted them, I think, the way I had, and something in his face changed. Not disgust, fear. The fear of inheriting whatever was wrong with her, whatever 45 refusals meant, whatever signal the tallies broadcast that I couldn't read. He turned and sat down. The sand ran out. The elder spoke a closing phrase. An attendant stepped forward with a small case. From it, she drew a needle and a length of dark thread. Velana extended her left arm without looking. The attendant stitched a new line into the cuff of the robe, number 46, cut the thread, and stepped back. Velana lowered her arm. She turned from the stone and walked back toward the door in the fortress wall. No one spoke to her. No one met her eyes. The courtyard rustled with the sound of 80 people adjusting their weight, clearing throats, reaching for data pads, and then the door closed behind her, and it was done. I sat on my bench and did not move for a long time. Cyril touched my elbow. The procurement session will resume in 1 hour. How long has this been going on? I said. The claiming, her claiming, Valana's. Firil's face was carefully neutral. 7 years, 7 years, since her 22nd cycle. She was offered first at the Accord gathering on Kethvaran's western terrace. No one spoke. She has been offered at every formal gathering since, approximately 6 to 8 gatherings per cycle year. I did the arithmetic in my head. 6 to 8 times a year for 7 years, 46 tallies. Every few weeks, she walked out through that silver-framed door and placed her hands on that stone and stood while strangers looked at her and decided she wasn't worth the word. Why, I asked. What's wrong with her? Firil's expression shifted just slightly, a tightening at the corners of his mouth that could have been irritation or something closer to pain. Nothing is wrong with her. Her health classification is exceptional. Her genetic viability is above median. She is intelligent. She speaks 3 trade dialects in addition to formal Keth Oran. Then why? The first refusal was, there was a dispute between houses, a territorial negotiation that made an alliance with Keth Oran temporarily disadvantageous. The suitor who had been expected to speak withdrew. After that, Firil paused. After that, the tallies speak for themselves. Each refusal makes the next more likely. The marks accumulate. Suitors see the count and they draw conclusions. The count becomes the reason, a cycle. I understood cycles. In trade, you see them. A product gets a reputation for defect. The reputation suppresses orders. The suppressed orders reduce the production run. The reduced run increases per unit cost. The increased cost confirms the reputation. Nothing was ever wrong with the product, just the number attached to it. Who decides to keep offering her? I said. The elder Sovreth Keth Oran. Her father, her uncle. Her father died when she was 11 cycles. Sovrath assumed house authority. The daughters became his to place. And if she refuses to stand. Firil looked at me with something approaching gentleness. A daughter does not refuse the elder's direction. It is not done. I thought about that through the procurement session. I thought about it through the formal lunch, through the cold dining hall with its 2 high ceilings, through the afternoon technical review, where I was supposed to be evaluating tensile specifications. I thought about 46 dark lines on a white robe and a woman's copper eyes fixed on nothing, while strangers circled her and walked away. That evening, instead of going to my quarters, I walked the fortress corridors. Kethvaran was old, centuries old, built from the same black stone as the ridge it sat on, worn smooth by generations of footsteps and wind. The corridors were lit by strips of bioluminescent material embedded in the walls, casting a cold blue-green glow that made everything look like the bottom of a deep lake. I walked without direction, trying to sort my thoughts, and found myself on a covered terrace that overlooked the eastern face of the mountain. She was there. Valana Ketharan sat on a stone bench at the terrace's edge, her back to me, looking out over the cloud bank below. She had changed out of the ceremonial robe and wore a plain dark tunic, simple, unadorned, no tallies. Her dark hair was loose against her shoulders. She held a small data reader in one hand, tilted toward the bioluminescent wall strip for light. I could have turned and left. I should have. But she heard my footsteps on the stone and turned her head, and I saw her copper eyes catch the blue-green light and hold it, and I realized that this was the first time I had seen her face without the offering stone between us. She studied me the way Firil had earlier, assessing, but there was something different in it. Curiosity, maybe. The faint surprise of seeing the only human in the fortress somewhere he wasn't expected. "You were in the courtyard this morning," she said. Her voice was lower than I had expected, steady, the kind of voice that had learned to keep itself even under pressure. I was. You watched the entire ceremony. I did. She looked at me for a moment longer, then returned her gaze to the clouds. Most trade envoys leave after the elder's opening address. It isn't very interesting to outsiders. It was interesting to me. She didn't respond to that. I stood at the terrace entrance, uncertain whether to stay or go, and she didn't invite me closer or ask me to leave. And in that silence I understood something about her. She had learned to exist in the gaps between other people's decisions. She did not ask for things. She did not expect things. She occupied the space she was given, and she endured. I left the terrace without saying anything more. But I thought about her face for the rest of the night, not its beauty, though she was striking in the way that strong features and steady eyes are always striking, but its composure, the total absence of self-pity. The way she sat alone on a cold bench in a cold fortress, reading by dim light, as though this were a life she had chosen rather than one she had been sentenced to. The next morning, I found Firal in the liaison office and asked him a question. If someone speaks the claiming word, what happens? A formal contract is filed. The daughter transfers household registration. The claiming party assumes consort status within the house, receiving the daughter. What does that mean for someone who isn't Kethoran? Someone from outside the bloodline registry? Firal set his datapad down. You are asking about a human. I am asking about the rules. The rules do not exclude non-registered species. A claim spoken at the offering stone by any attendee of a formal gathering is binding under House, Kethoran Charter and the Accord's domestic contract provisions. He paused. But it has never been done. What's the word? I beg your pardon. The claiming word. What is it? Firal studied me. I have been studied by aliens before. It comes with the work. Being the only human in rooms built for people shaped differently than you. But this was different. He was not assessing my trade credentials or my language competency. He was trying to decide if I was serious. Velashan, he said quietly. It means I hold her, or more precisely, she is held by me. The nearest human equivalent might be she's mine now. I thanked him and went to my quarters. I did not sleep well. I lay in the narrow bunk and listened to the wind scrape against the fortress walls, and thought about what I was considering. I was 41 years old. I had lived alone for all of them, not unhappily, not bitterly, just alone, the way some men are alone, because they never found a reason strong enough to stop. I had been posted to 9 systems. I had eaten meals on worlds where the gravity made my bones ache, and worlds where the air was so rich it made me dizzy. I had negotiated contracts worth more than some colonies, and I had done it competently and without complaint, and I had never once, in 16 years, done something that mattered to anyone in the room for any reason other than the numbers I brought with me. I thought about the terrace, about her face in the blue-green light, about the way she said, "It isn't very interesting to outsiders," not bitterly, not pointedly, just as a fact. The way you describe weather, the way you describe something that has been true so long, it has stopped being a wound and become geography. I want to be precise about this, because precision matters. I was not in love with Valana Kethoran. I had not spoken more than 5 sentences to her. I had seen her for perhaps 12 minutes at the stone, and 5 more on the terrace, and in those minutes I had watched her endure something that no one in the fortress seemed to think was remarkable, and I had felt something break loose in my chest that I did not have a clean word for. What I felt was this: she deserved to be chosen, not rescued, not pitied, chosen, the way you choose something you have looked at clearly and decided matters. I had spent 41 years not choosing much of anything beyond the next contract and the next posting and the next cold dining hall. It occurred to me, lying in that bunk with the wind outside, that I might have been waiting for something worth the word. I told myself there were 100 reasons not to do it. I was a trade envoy, not a diplomat. I had no standing in Ketharon society. I did not know her. She did not know me. The contract was binding, and I had no idea what consort status entailed in a house whose customs I had been studying for less than 2 weeks. I would be inserting myself into a political structure I barely understood. For a woman who had never asked for my help, in a fortress above the clouds on a planet I could not pronounce correctly. I told myself all of this. I lay in the dark, and I weighed every reason against the image of an attendant stitching a 46th mark into a white robe while the woman wearing it held out her arm and did not look down, and the reasons, one by one, stopped mattering. I got up before dawn. I pressed my boots on and went to find the house registrar. The next claiming was held 3 days later. A smaller gathering, perhaps 40 people, mostly house members and a few visiting delegates from a mining concern on the southern continent. The same courtyard, the same wind, the same offering stone, dark and polished, catching the morning light. Valana walked out through the silver-framed door. The same robe, 46 tallies. Her hands went flat on the stone. Her eyes went to the distance. Her face was composed the way a wall is composed, not through effort, but through having been standing long enough that the idea of falling no longer occurred. The elder spoke the lineage name, the health classification, the genetic index. The sand timer was turned. One suitor stood. An older Keth Oran from a northern territory, large, careful, slow. He approached the stone and asked the elder about agricultural merger terms. The elder answered. The man weighed the answer visibly, calculating yield, and overhead the way I calculate tensile specifications, and withdrew. No one else stood. The sand was half gone. I stood. The courtyard was quiet already, but the quality of the quiet changed. I felt it in the way Firil's breath stopped beside me, in the way the elder's eyes tracked me as I walked down the stone steps from the back bench. A human, the only human in the room, walking toward the offering stone in a trade envoy's plain jacket with no house chain, no formal cloak, no crest. Valana did not move. Her hands stayed flat on the stone. Her eyes stayed on the distance. She had watched suitors approach 46 times. She had no reason to think 47th would be different. Not close, 3 paces, the formal inspection distance. But I did not circle her. I did not look at her hands or her jaw or the tallies on her robe. I looked at her face. She had fine features, a strong jaw that softened at the chin, a thin scar along her left temple, old silver against the teal-green skin. Her dark hair moved in the wind, but she didn't reach for it. Her copper eyes were fixed on the sky behind me, steady as instrument readings, and there was nothing in them I could name except endurance. I turned to the elder. "I have a question," I said. My Ketharan was adequate. Not elegant, but clear. The elder's expression was stone. "Ask. How many times has your daughter been offered?" Sovrath Kethoran's jaw tightened. 46 prior ceremonies. "And how many times has a suitor asked her a question? Not you. Her." The silence was different now. Sovrath did not answer. I turned back to Valana. Her eyes had moved. Not much, a fraction of a degree, enough to bring my face into the edge of her focus. She was not looking at me directly. She was waiting to see if I, too, would turn and walk away. "Valana Keth Oran," I said. Her copper eyes shifted fully to mine. It was the first time in the entire ceremony, in 46 ceremonies, that I believe anyone had used her name at the stone. "My name is Corin Mays. I am a human trade oi. I hold no house rank. I carry no crest." I paused. "I would like to know if you have been asked, at any point in 7 years of claimings whether you wanted to be here. The wind filled the courtyard. The sand ran. Valana Ketharan looked at me the way you look at something you have stopped believing exists, like rain in a season that has been dry so long you forgot the word for it, and she said, "No, no one has asked. No one has asked." I nodded. I kept my eyes on hers. There was nothing in the courtyard except the two of us, and the stone between us, and the wind, and the sound of sand falling through glass. "Then I'm asking," I said, "do you want to be here?" Something moved in her face. Not much. A shift in the muscles around her eyes, a change in the line of her mouth that was so small I might have imagined it if I hadn't been watching her the way I was watching her, carefully, steadily, the way you watch something that matters and that you have decided not to look away from. "No," she said. Her voice was low and even, and the single syllable carried more weight than any trade negotiation I had ever conducted. "I do not." I turned to the elder. Zovrath Ketharan's face had gone rigid, not with anger, not yet, but with the specific tension of a man watching his authority approached from a direction he hadn't fortified. "Then end it," I said. "You have no standing to make demands in this courtyard, envoy." "I'm not making a demand," I said. "I'm speaking the word." I looked at Valana. Her eyes were on me, her hands were still flat on the stone, but her fingers had curled, just slightly, the nails pressing into the polished black surface. "Velashan," I said. The courtyard went silent. Not the rustling, adjusting, throat-clearing silence of 40 people watching a routine ceremony. True silence. The kind where the wind sounds loud. The elder did not move. "Velashan," I said again, quieter, for her. "She's mine now, the house registrar." A small woman with silver-gray skin and a formal data pad, clutched against her chest, stepped forward from the bench where she had been sitting. Her eyes were wide. Her hands were not steady. But her voice, when she spoke, was the voice of someone reading law, and law does not care who speaks it or who hears it. "The word has been spoken," she said. "Under House Ketharan Charter, Section 14, and Accord Domestic Contract Provision 371, the claim is recorded. Consort designation is filed. The daughter Valana Ketharan is held." Zovrath Ketharan took one step toward me. His hand was on the chain across his chest. "You are a human. I am. You have no house, no lineage, no rank." "I have the word," I said. "And she has an answer no one ever let her give." The elder's mouth opened, closed, his hand dropped from the chain. Valana's fingers uncurled from the stone. She lifted her hands slowly, the way you lift something you have been holding for so long that the muscles have forgotten they can let go. She looked at her palms. Flat, reddened from the pressure, the teal-green skin, flush dark where the stone had pressed. And I saw her fingers tremble once, very slightly, before she closed them into fists and then opened them again, steadier. Then she looked at me. I did not touch her. I did not reach for her hand, or her arm, or her shoulder. I stood 3 paces away in my trade envoy's jacket, with no crest and no chain, and I looked back at her, and I waited. The wind moved between us, and the sand timer stood empty, and the elder was a rigid figure at the edge of my vision, his authority intact in every formal sense, and broken in the only one that mattered. "You asked me," she said. "I did. No one has ever asked me." "I know." Her copper eyes held mine. They were wet, not crying, not breaking, but wet the way metal gets wet when the temperature changes and the air gives up what it's been carrying. Condensation. Something that had been held for a long time, released not through force, but through a change in pressure. And behind the wetness, something else. Something I recognized because I had seen it once before, on the terrace, when she turned her head and caught me standing in the doorway. Curiosity. The cautious, undefended curiosity of someone who has just encountered something she doesn't have a category for. "Why?" she said. I thought about how to answer that. I thought about the 12 minutes on the back bench 3 days ago, and the 46 tallies, and the way she looked at the distance, because looking at the people who had come to judge her was a thing she had stopped doing years ago. I thought about the terrace and the blue-green light and the data reader tilted toward the wall. I thought about all the clean, precise, diplomatic things I could say, the things a trade envoy says, the things that hold no risk and carry no weight. "Because you were standing there," I said, "and no one was seeing you." She was quiet for a long time. The wind moved her dark hair across her face, and she did not push it away. The registrar was writing on her datapad, the stylus moving in quick, precise strokes, the sound of a contract being made permanent, a record entering the system that could not be unstitched the way a tally could. The courtyard full of people was watching a thing that none of them had expected, and most of them did not understand. A human trade envoy with no bloodline and no rank standing at the offering stone, as though standing there were the simplest thing in the world, as though 46 refusals were a number he had read and dismissed and replaced with a single word. Valana Ketharan stepped back from the offering stone. She looked at it, the polished black surface where her hands had rested 47 times. And then she looked away from it, and I understood that she would never touch it again. She walked toward me, not quickly, not slowly. The pace of someone crossing a threshold they had stopped believing existed. She stopped at the edge of the formal distance, close enough that I could see the thin silver scar on her temple, close enough that I could see the individual stitches of the 46 tallies on her robe, each one a ceremony where she had stood and been found insufficient by people who had never spoken her name. "Koran Maes," she said. "Valana, I don't know you. No, you don't know me. No." She was quiet again. Then something changed in her face, not a smile, not quite, but the earliest structural shift of a thing that might, in time, become one. The way the sky changes color a full minute before the sun actually clears the ridge. "Then we start from here," she said. I nodded. Behind us, the registrar finished writing. The datapad chimed. A small administrative sound, the sound of a contract filed, a record closed, a cycle ended. The sand timer ran out, and no one turned it over. We left the courtyard through the silver-framed door, side by side, 3 paces apart, the formal distance that the ceremony prescribed, and that I intended to let her close when and if she chose to. The door was heavy and old, and it moved on hinges that had carried the weight of 7 years of claimings, and when it shut behind us, the sound echoed off the black stone walls of the corridor like something falling into place. The corridor was dim after the open sky. The blue-green bioluminescent strips cast their cold light across the stone, and our footsteps echoed in a rhythm that was not synchronized and did not need to be. I could hear her breathing, even controlled, the breathing of someone who has just walked through a doorway she had walked through 46 times before and knows that this time the walk means something different. Cyril was waiting inside. His narrow face was unreadable, but his hands were clasped tight around his datapad, and his eyes moved between me and Valana with the careful attention of someone who has just watched the rules he lives by bend in a direction he hadn't considered. "The procurement session," he said after a moment, "will need to be rescheduled." "I expect so," I said. He looked at Valana, and something passed across his face that I had not seen from him in 11 days of liaison work. Something unguarded and quick, like a light switched on in a room that had been dark for a long time. It was gone before I could name it. but I thought it might have been relief. Valana looked at Firil, then at me. The corridor was dim and cold, and the wind came through the stone in thin lines, and her copper eyes caught what little light there was and held it. "The marks," she said. She touched the sleeve of her robe, the dark thread, the vertical lines. 46 of them. They'll want to remove them. The house tailors. Now that the claiming is done, do you want them removed? She looked at the tallies for a long time, each one a ceremony, each one a refusal, each one a needle and thread and a silence that said, "You are not enough," administered publicly, stitched into the fabric she wore to the next offering, so that the next courtyard would know, before she opened her mouth, that she had already been found wanting. "No," she said, "I think I'll keep them." I understood. They were not shame. They never had been. They were a record of every time she had stood at that stone, and not broken, not bent, not begged. 46 proofs that she could endure a thing that should not have been asked of her and come back standing. "Then keep them," I said. We walked down the corridor together, 3 paces apart, the wind outside, the stone underfoot, the blue-green light making everything look like a place that existed underwater, a place between one world and the next. She walked with the same straight-backed composure she had carried at the stone, but something was different now. A looseness in her shoulders, a fraction of a degree less rigidity in the line of her spine, as though a weight she had been balancing there for 7 years had shifted, and she was still learning how to stand without it. I had come to Kethvaran to negotiate hull composites. I was leaving, whenever I left, and I was in no hurry now, with something I hadn't known I was looking for, given by a woman who hadn't known anyone was coming. The future, whatever it held, however long it took to learn each other's names and silences, and the shape of a life built between 2 people who had started as strangers in a cold courtyard above the clouds, was ahead of us. Unwritten, unclaimed by anyone but ourselves, that is how it started. Not with love. Love takes time, and time was a thing we were only beginning to have. But with a word spoken at a stone, and a question no one else had thought to ask, and a woman who heard it and, for the first time in 7 years, answered.